Our next talk is called No Other Option, How to Move Forward When Medication Does Not Influence Voices and Visions. And our speaker is Annie Stafford, and she's a certified peer specialist and psychiatric survivor. Annie is a committed member of being part of a radical mental health reform and currently resides in the suburbs of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania.
Got to get used to using the microphone. Well, hey, thanks for coming. My name is Annie Stafford. I get anxious doing these speaking things, so bear with me if I bumble a little bit, but this is a topic that I am extremely passionate about. So thank you guys for choosing to come to this presentation. All right. Can it go forward? Any chance to click the thing? No. Oh, there we go. Okay, now back. Okay, perfect. Now forward. So I am just gonna talk a little bit about my hearing voices journey. So I'm a voice hearer. I hear voices, I see visions, I experience perceptual differences. So for me, just to give a little bit of context into this, kind of an important part of my story. So when I was in second grade, prior to that even, I was a really anxious child. Just immediately, right off the bat, my mom noticed a lot of anxieties in me just from a young age. So that was always kind of a part of who I am. And I got to second grade. I was in a Catholic school, really for no other reason other than it was convenient. It was near the house. We're not particularly religious, but we thought this could be a decent experience. So when I was in second grade, I had a teacher and she was a nun. And this teacher really sniffed out kind of vulnerabilities in me as a child. And all of a sudden, this teacher started kind of preying on me, for lack of a better word, in a very kind of confusing context for me as a second grader. She preyed on those anxieties in me, those vulnerabilities, and she would pull me aside and tell me that I was bad, that I was going to hell, that my family was going to hell. Scary things like that. She would, pull me aside in the corner and say these things to me, or lean down and whisper them as I was doing my work, or publicly, in front of the class, she would point out that my family wasn't at church on Sunday and that we were bad. So that experience was extremely scary for me as a child. And the way that kind of manifested was that I really became scared to open my mouth. I felt like everything that I did was bad. Everything about me was wrong, that I was evil, that I was going to send my family to hell if I said the wrong thing. So I developed obsessive compulsive disorder. Everything that I touched, I had about a 13-step ritual that I had to do to wipe my fingerprints off, so that nothing could be traced back to me, to my family. And it was just every single thing that I touched, I had to do this for. And it was exhausting as a child. And it became so exhausting that I essentially stopped talking. I not entirely, but almost entirely went mute for a long time, because I was just so overwhelmed. And my family was really scared by what was going on. They didn't really understand. It took them a while to grasp the full picture of it. And, eventually we did get into a long battle with the school. All of that in itself was a lot to handle. But so that was my experience at 7 years old with the mental health system. That was when I started to go to therapy, when I started medication, when I really entered the system. And that was at 7 years old. So I say that because it's that's been my life. I really have almost no memory of a life without services and medication and intervention of all sorts. So I entered and I never really left. So all of that just kind of got pushed down. I did a little bit of work, but I was still so young. It was so confusing for me to try to process. There was really no good answer at that time. So when I got to the summer before 6th grade, I started hearing voices. I started seeing visions. That was terrifying for me. These things started out very religious in nature. It was the devil. It was, God. It was demons, and all of these voices had the direct correlation to the trauma that I had experienced of you're going to hell, you're bad, you're this. But even still, when you're in that phase, it's hard to make that connection that it's tied to the trauma. It's so overwhelming that you don't really know what to think. So it started like that. It started very religious in nature. And then it kind of took the form of distressing figures in my life. I would start to hear the messages of some of the people in my life that I had hardships with, or that I didn't necessarily have the best relationships with. It moved on from that to just kind of like nonsensical, just sounds, screaming, shrieking, animal noises. So it really arranged the gamut of there were some things in there that had direct meaning. And then there were some things that were just like screaming bloody murder at me. And it became really difficult to manage that. And it took me a long time to talk to my family about what was going on. I've always had mental health challenges in terms of anxiety, extreme anxiety. It's hard to do these types of things. Depression, that OCD, panic attacks. And I could talk about them, but there was something different about talking about the hearing voices. It's always been more of a challenge for me to articulate the experience. But when I did talk to my mom about it, she couldn't have been better. I'm so grateful to have the mother that I do. And we are fortunate to live in a county that really is progressive in terms of hearing voices. We have a network, we have a chapter, we have really kind of influential people who are involved in the movement that are located in my area. So she really just immediately just kind of jumped into problem solving mode. She just started researching everything she could about the topic. It wasn't something that she had known about. But this was kind of the beginning of a really long, difficult chapter in my life of just a revolving door of inpatient hospitalizations, really just every service they could throw at me, stay in a group home, just a lot of long, dark years that started, and it was always made more complex by my hearing voices. So it was also during that time the start of antipsychotics, extremely, extremely heavy antipsychotics. So that's just a little bit of context about my hearing voices beginnings. And it's not going to do it again. So if we could flip. Perfect. Okay. So yeah, there were many years that I was just caught in this system that just spit me out over and over. It's hard not to feel a little bit angry. I definitely am an angry person. I'm trying to work on that. But it was just, there was so little meaningful that was done during that time. Out of all of those hospitalizations and services, it was just a holding cell, really. It was just a place to give me more medication, to watch me struggle with the medication. And yeah, there was nothing that was done meaningfully. And I would get out and I wouldn't know how to do anything differently. And the voices were still there, and very similar to what Jennifer said earlier. You learn pretty early on the implications of saying that you hear voices or that you see visions. You learn that nothing good comes out of that. And you just learn to stay quiet about it. I mean, I made that mistake too many times of admitting that my voices were still there, my visions were still there. And It just led to higher doses of medication, which like you wouldn't think was even humanly possible at that point. Longer inpatient stays, and yeah, just more intense. Okay, now they're going to supervise me. Now I can't do this activity. I have to stay back. It was just, even in this already restricted environment, it became more and more restricted. So that was a very dark period. And with the antipsychotics, the ironic part was that it never affected my voices. It never made anything better. It never decreased the volume of my voices or the content of my voices. It was just unaffected. And I felt like there was something wrong with me, that I was defective and damaged, that for whatever reason, I was unreachable by these voices being unaffected. And I felt a lot of shame from that. And it wasn't until much later in my life that I found out that there is a large percentage of people who hear voices that are unaffected by the medication. And that's why this like beautiful movement exists, to help people learn to live with their voices and their visions. And so I earned these labels pretty quickly: treatment resistant, difficult client, unreachable. And they followed me throughout my whole life. I was the client that like you did not want to have, not because I wasn't receptive to, if there was something that could help me, I was open to it. I didn't want to be in these services, but I complied because I thought that was the only option that I had. But I couldn't help it that, I wasn't making progress. And I wasn't making progress because I am not like the perfect client. Like I didn't fit into the little box of what a client should look like and what their symptoms should present as. Those traditional methods just never worked for me. And again, I felt guilty about that. I felt hopeless. But I just couldn't help it. And when you're made to feel bad by services, it's kind of a sad thing, like I would hear them talking about me like, oh, we're going to discharge her. There's nothing, the psychiatrist just came in, pumped me up, were visibly frustrated. When I would say that like nothing was helping, they would just usher me out the door. And I just felt like just a human guinea pig. And that was a difficult thing to live with for a long time. And because the professionals in my life had these ideas of, just me as this difficult client, as unreachable, I just got tossed back in. And that's where kind of the anger comes from, is that I lost a lot of years of my life to this just kind of very broken, fragmented mental health system that isn't designed with alternatives in mind. I felt like I was the only person that was experiencing this for so long. And I have to believe that that's not true. I have to believe, and being here helps me to see that there are other people that are in the position that I am. And that's why I'm so passionate about kind of spreading the message of hearing voices. And the ironic part was that when I was in the hospital and I was trying to get out, it wasn't even my voices and visions that were the most distressing to me per se. Like it was my depression, it was my anxiety, it was my OCD. Like those were the things that I wanted help with, but that wasn't accepted by the doctors. It was, well, if you're hearing voices, that's what we're going to help with. That's where we're going to work on. So my treatment was not person-centered, as they love to say. Let's see. Yay. So for me, my turning point, I went on for a lot of years, just kind of living with the voices and just pushing it down. It was really difficult for me to talk about. It still is kind of difficult. But as I said, my mom linked me up with services in the county, and I attended a conference that was a huge turning point for me. That was Ron Coleman, who is wonderful in the Hearing Voices movement. And he did so much for me during that conference, and he worked with my voices and he helped me to identify, which I was very reluctant to do. And it was really hard for me to take a look at some of the people that my voices were originating from. And he helped me to identify that, yeah, this trauma that I had experienced had fundamentally impacted me in this way, that I was still hearing the voice of this nun. I was still hearing the voice of the priest, or, of my father during a difficult time in my life. He helped me to make those connections. And that was just the beginning. There was so much more, like that was kind of a voice profiling that we did. And that was kind of the turning point, though, for me to start to look at this as a deeper kind of, not problem, but a deeper thing that my body was trying to tell me, that I was trying to overcome this, and I was struggling to cope. So I reached a point of acceptance with my voices, that regardless of psychiatry, accepting that I was going to hear voices, they kept trying to extinguish. And it took me just coming to the point of, I hear voices. This is something that, as of right now, it looks like I'm going to have to learn to live with. And if I want to live any quality of life, like, I have to manage this somehow. So it was really powerful for me to get to the place that I could accept that. And I just, I made the choice that I wanted to come off the antipsychotics. It was killing me. The antipsychotics were killing me. At 13, 14, 15, all these ages, I was as well as dead. I couldn't speak. If you had a conversation with me, my eyes just rolled back. I mean, I was drooling, I was overweight. I was barely in school. It was hell. It was absolute hell on earth. And I was in a group home that they weren't allowing me any say over my medication. They were just feeding me more and more. And even despite, my mom advocating and telling them that she wanted me to come off this medication, they wouldn't do it. They would just increase it. And there's something so sick about that we have I had no authority over my own body. I just felt like a human guinea pig, and I truly wanted to die. So it reached a point that I just needed to accept that the antipsychotics weren't going to work. And with dismal support from psychiatry, I went through the withdrawal process of coming off these medications, which essentially felt like coming off of hard drugs, just shaking and vomiting and just, some of the worst feelings. But it was worth it. I wanted to be alive again. So coming off of those antipsychotics, it was a really truly a physical return to form for me. It felt like little by little, I learned to speak again. Honestly, I started to form thoughts again. I started to be able to move my body again. It felt like slowly the lights were coming on. But yeah, it was learning how to be alive again after all of that. And I just made the choice that the traditional mental health system really didn't have the answers that I needed. And that has followed me throughout my life. I mean, even last year, I had an extremely difficult last year. I've had an extremely difficult multiple years, but I really, I experienced psychosis again. And again, I turned to the traditional mental health system, as they say, seek help, get help. But that's not always really true, because then they kind of, I didn't have the right insurance for it. I didn't have the right diagnosis for this. I, couldn't come here unless I had been there. So again, it was upsetting that I was experiencing the psychosis and these same problems were still persistent. So that's why I'm so grateful to the Hearing Voices approach, because that's the one thing that's been with me throughout my entire life. I entered that at about 12 years old, after that conference, there was a young person's hearing voices support group that started up near me. And it was really, I was the group for a long time. Nobody else was there. But there was just a wonderful woman who was kind of my mentor of sorts and just sat with me and held the space for me and slowly introduced me to this network and this approach. And Eleanor Longden, who, if you're not familiar with, is fantastic. And yeah, the Victim to Victor workbook. And we worked through these resources little by little. And she just never pressured me to move beyond what I was ready for. And yeah, slowly a few people began to trickle into the group, and it became a really supportive space for me for many years to have to go to on Tuesday nights. I would go there and just sit with these people. And, you know, they were, for the most part, significantly older than me, but we all had the same experience in common. And it was really beautiful to see the relationship that formed from that, and just to be able to speak openly about what I was going through. That was really pivotal for me. So that's when I started to get more and more involved in the network and the approach. And I'm fortunate to be able to provide mental health trainings to the county that I reside in for mental health workers on hearing voices, and, you know, to engage in these opportunities. And it's been kind of cool because these are the people who saw me at, 12 years old, just, lights out, and they watched me kind of come back, and they were supportive. And that's what we need, is people to give you opportunities, to make a difference. And they provided me the space to be able to share my story, and they believed that my story was important, and they fostered that growth in me. And that meant everything to me. So I'm very grateful for that. And just as opposed to the medical approach, which I found oppressive, both physically and emotionally. I mean, my body was physically oppressed with all of the medications, and my mind was physically oppressed. My opinion was just disregarded. It was regarded as crazy, as not right. And it just didn't matter. I was not a human to them. So to start to second guess every thought you have, is it's not good enough, it's not worth anything. That played tricks on my mind for a long time. It was ineffective in that these medications didn't work, and there was no plan B. If the medication didn't work, just up it, give it more. It was crazy to me that there was no other option that I was being provided with other than medication. And when it didn't work, it was chastising. I mean, I was treated like a child. I was, ridiculed. Well, what do you mean it's not working? Why isn't it not working? Well, if it's not working, you should be in the hospital. Well, all these things, it was so belittling to me as a person. And again, I couldn't help that it wasn't working, because it was deeper than just a sickness. This was so many years of unprocessed trauma, so many complex traumas that were all working inside of me, so many weird. It was a whole body, a whole lifetime of things that just simply medication wasn't going to work for. So that's what made it so simplistic. And ultimately it was just soul crushing. It was horrible. It took my spirit from me for so long. And I just felt like a sickness. I felt defective. I felt like there was something so fundamentally wrong with me that I couldn't be on this earth, and I didn't want to be on this earth. And it was, it was really sad. It's hard to really articulate into words. I am a writer, so I do better writing things, but it was sad. So when I came to the Hearing Voices approach, just to be treated with unfaltering respect for the first time since, 7 years old, to be just human decency to be called by my name, to be asked my opinion, to, if I didn't want to share, that to be respected, for my opinion when I did want to share, to be respected. That was really the thing that was kind of the first seed planted in that healing journey for me, just to feel like I was a human again. And it's kind of crazy sometimes when I do the trainings that, like, I don't know that I even have to say that. Sometimes I feel weird about, like, that, like, treat people with respect, but, like, apparently you do have to say that. So I'll say it, sure. And it was holistic. It was just, there was never any emphasis on medication. In fact, there was these variety of coping skills that were presented to me, and we would brainstorm things, and I learned about these interesting things to help, like, my hearing voices. Yeah. Making appointments with your voices, or, questioning them. Like, if they, I would always hear, we're going to kill you. We're going to kill your family. I would have to call my poor mother, 75 times a day. Are you alive? Are you alive? Are you alive? And, like, starting to question that, well, what's the, how likely is that to actually happen? Like, interesting things like that. To, it was suggested from Ron, like, if you're hearing voices and you're outside, like, you can hold up a cell phone and talk on the cell phone, and that way you can still respond to your voices. Just this whole variety of things that medication was not included in. It was just amazing to hear some of the creative ways that the people in the group were managing their lives. So I really appreciated that. It was self-motivated in that, like, it took me a long time to get to the point that I was ready to work through things, and I wasn't forced. One of the biggest gripes that I had with the traditional mental health services was that, it was always, we'll meet you where you're at. We'll meet you where you're at. Like, it takes time. We understand that. But then, okay, like 1, 2, 3 months would go by and the progress wasn't there yet. And then, like, the time was run out. Like, the period that they would work with me was done. Like, again, because it wasn't ideal for them, because they had progress notes to check off or what have you. Like, there went the latitude. Okay, now you're difficult. And again, like, I couldn't help it that my progress was a bit slower than maybe was ideal. So just to not feel like there was pressure to progress beyond what I was ready for, that again meant a lot to me. And just that it was hopeful. Again, that's the biggest thing. Without hope, we have nothing. And I had no hope for so many years. And that's a horrible way to live your life. But I was so fortunate to have these people around me that held the hope for me before I could hold it for myself. I mean, I had people who just believed that I was going to get through this. And, I had a supportive family. I had a good therapist who worked with me. I had teachers at school who just felt bad for me. But they saw potential in me and they didn't let that go. And those messages that I was told of, like, once you get through this, you're going to have something to say. Like, yeah, it gives me goosebumps to think about, because when you hear from the professionals, what the messages that my parents were told of, like everybody has said here, get ready to manage your expectations. This isn't, the life isn't going to go how you think it's going to go. She maybe can get a job doing this, maybe she can be independent, these things. To have your life get that small at, like, 14 years old or what have you, that's criminal. I mean, somebody asked a question, like, is there a point that hope isn't possible, that this is just going to be someone's life? And no, like, as long as you're alive and breathing, yeah, there's hope. So in learning to coexist with my voices, which I've had to do, so I do hear voices really essentially every second of the day in some form, which makes it really difficult to, like, work. Working has been a huge struggle for me, maintaining employment, which creates a whole nother, the financial instability of it all, as was mentioned, the relationship between people and SSDI and all of these things. But I want to be independent, and I want to have a life that I am maintaining and working towards. So I keep trying. I fail so much. It's ridiculous. I fail constantly. I learn through failure. But I keep trying. So in working with the voices and trying to do these things, I've just had to develop compassion for them, as was mentioned again by Jennifer, which was such a great panel that she did. Having compassion for these voices, they are so mean and they are so critical, and they cut deep. But the biggest thing for me has just been to recognize that those voices are the most hurt parts of myself. They are that child who was so scared when I went through that trauma in second grade. They're the child that was scared during all those hospitalizations when I was at the most vulnerable point in my life, and I had no comfort of home, no family, nothing. They're all of these things. They're the bullying, they're the sexual assault. They're all of these things that are so just raw inside me that I still have to work towards. And they come out through voices and visions. And I think that if I didn't have these voices and visions, I don't think I would be here, because they're what my body has created to cope with these things, which, when you think about it, is kind of highly intellectual, that your body could develop this creative way of coping. So I really just try to lead with compassion, and that can be very challenging, but I can't say enough about how that has allowed me to start to coexist with my voices in a manner that I can stand here and do things like this, and I can get on a plane and travel and pursue my education. Compassion. Additionally is alternative healing, and that's been a huge journey. And I say healing, I don't love the word recovery personally, because I feel like it has some kind of implication of this destination. I feel like there's a lot of weight to it. So I just prefer to say healing, because it's, it feels better to me. So for me, I've kind of been on, I consider it like an independent study of sorts, to find the things that work for me, because they weren't services, they weren't medication. So I knew what they weren't, but what they were is what I've been trying to find out. And personally, for me, writing has been huge. When the voices and the visions are at their worst, I try to use that as an opportunity to just get it all out and write it down. And that feels like the most effective form of therapy that I've had in a long time. So I really value writing, and I definitely would advocate it to other people as well to try, because you start to see the dots connecting, you start to understand, why you're feeling the way you do, and piecing these little things together, and on your own terms, which I think is the biggest thing. It's on your own terms. Additionally, just self-discovery. I entered the system so young, and I missed all of those foundational years, all of those middle high school years, when everybody was out, going to a dance or going to the mall or this and that. I was in the psychiatric hospital. I was on medication. I was doing these things. So I just try to find what it is that I enjoy, honestly, because I don't even know. So I try really anything that could work. I try therapeutic horseback riding. I'll try a dance class. I'll try boxing. I'll try figure skating. All these things that you just don't know what's going to stick. And it's also just, a journey of self-discovery. And even when these things fail horribly, I'm still gaining these skills towards independence. Last year, as I was going through this state of psychosis, I was convinced that I needed to get out, that the problem was where I was. I needed to go somewhere else. I needed to start new. I decided Charleston, I'm going to go to Charleston and I'm going to fix it there and everything's going to be okay. And it was such a disaster. I can't even put it into words. Like I barely made it out of the airport, but still somehow, like I learned that I can navigate difficult situations, and I learned that the problem isn't where I am, like it's inside. And so you're always learning these things. And just like research, I would say. I try to gather as much resources as I can. I love to read. I don't identify with any diagnosis at this point in my life. I couldn't put less kind of thought into that, but I just read as much as I can on material. I like to read Mad in America, read things that people in my situation have experienced themselves. I just try to gather literature and then just work on it a little bit at a time, like day after day. Get up early and work through a workbook on like my hearing voices or my anxiety or what have you. So I've just created this kind of independent study of sorts, and it's ever evolving. And again, I learn what doesn't work for me, like way before I learn what does work. But it's an interesting journey. And connection, just remaining connected to the Hearing Voices Network. That's something that provides me with meaningful opportunities to connect with other people, to remain involved in the work, to just keep learning. Again, lifelong student. And I'm someone who tends to isolate like heavily. So just to connect to human life, honestly. And I try to think about the positives. And at this point in my life, like I can really say that there are positives. I feel kind of fortunate that I have this weird support system, weird, twisted, odd support system that like, if other people are mean to me, like that's not okay. Like they're like, no, we're the only ones who can be mean to you. But like if somebody else starts something, they're like, are you going to take that? Like, are you going to take that? No, like, so it's just strange. And I'm a really lonely person, and these guys are my friends. Like they're my weird, odd friends, and they've gotten me through some hard times when I think if I didn't have them, I don't know that I would be here. And just my final thoughts would be young people. In the work I do, I like connect with young people all the time who express that they're hearing voices. And I don't think that enough of a push is made to reach those young people and provide them with options for alternative recovery, such as the Hearing Voices Network, such as ISPS. The sooner that we can reach them, we can prevent that harmful traumatization of the mental health system, that revolving door. So I really would advocate, like, get creative. We got to do better to get the young people. Hearing Voices is a social justice movement, just as everybody has said here. It's the choice, it's the freedom to choose. Medication is totally personal, but we shouldn't be forced to take it. And like, we should have the right to fail. Maybe somebody doesn't want to take medication and maybe they fail, and like, that's okay. As a system, we have to get more comfortable with taking risks and letting people decide and learn through experience, and just let that be okay. So just remembering that this is truly a liberation of people. This is the most vulnerable population, and often they're hidden and like locked away, and we can't forget them. And psychosis does not have to be a death, but a rebirth. Some of my most valuable insights have come from the periods of psychosis that I've had over my lifetime. It has deepened me as a person, and I'm grateful for it. I am grateful for it. It's led me to do this work that I'm so passionate about, and I'm going to keep being annoying and pesky and advocating against traditional mental health until there's options. That's the key word here. Options available for people that just don't fit into that mold. So for the people that have experienced this, like so many of you, like insane warriors here today who have overcome your own battles, like you got something to say. And ultimately, like these are going to be the people who change the entire world. So I really believe that. And that's all. Yeah. Thanks. Thanks. I don't know if anybody has any questions or anything. Don't feel. Yes.
Hi. Thank you so much for sharing your experiences. I'm a clinician. I don't have a lived experience, but obviously this is what I do. And I think what's powerful, and I've heard a lot about this weekend, but specifically you mentioned, is learning that whatever you're experiencing can be wrong. And a lot of my young folks tend to deal with voices, or just like these experiences that just give them really negative messages. Any suggestions on how to move them through that and get, like, helping them get to the other side of like, this isn't necessarily true?
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think letting them feel that, and kind of curiosity would be the big word in that. Just being curious about what those messages are and what does that mean to the young person. And like, you want to let people come to their discoveries on their own terms, for sure. Maybe there's something that sticks out to you, and you can, like, maybe there's something in their story that connects to the voice and they might not see it. So you can kind of prompt people along and ask kind of questions like that, but just not suppressing that, because suppression ultimately leads to angrier, more aggressive voices. So kind of letting them feel that and like move through that moment, and you being there with them, I guarantee you, will be the most meaningful thing about it. Just validating what their experience is. But just be curious with them. Yeah. Hey.
Yeah. Hi, I'm a psychiatric provider, also without lived experience. Mm-hmm. One thing that and also thank you so much for sharing. One thing I've learned from this conference is that one legitimate use of antipsychotics could be if it reduces the fear, or maybe any medication that helps reduce fear can be helpful. Mm-hmm. Any other situations for you in your experience where medications could have had a legitimate place possibly in your treatment?
Sure. Yeah. No, I mean, I take a lot of medication, frankly, for anxiety, for depression, for these other things. I mean, I think the biggest thing is that medication can be a stepping stone. There was a period in my life when I did really need that medication, and moving through that time, I mean, too many people get stuck on these medications for the rest of their life, and they have these just physical, horrible experiences as a result of them. So I would certainly say that it's valid to have someone be on a medication if that's what they're choosing to do in a real acute period of pain and whatnot, but then working with that person once they're ready to start to taper off of that. And, I take these things for anxiety and depression and whatnot, because that's what's most distressing to me. Like, I have learned to just kind of deal with this and handle this. So I choose to not even really bring it up with the psychiatry anymore, because it'll just be, hearing voices. Okay, we got to get you going. So there's certainly a place for it, but again, it's the right to choose. And ideally, I would love to stop. I would love for people to not be on these things for the rest of their life, because it can be challenging.
Thank you so much. I am realizing that I think a lot of times we medicate people to medicate our own fear.
Sure. That's really valuable insight. And for clinicians without lived experience, I mean, there's no shame in that. Just being in that space with somebody and just being open and receptive to what they have to say, that's so meaningful. So you don't have to have lived experience to connect with these people. Just the fact that you're willing to listen and move through them in these moments, that means everything. So, yeah.
Hi, thank you so much for your presentation. I really connected with it. I am a doctoral candidate in clinical psychology. So part of what I do is I work with people who hear voices. Mm-hmm. And I've realized that, similar to your experience, sometimes what they want doesn't get respected with providers. And so as someone who wants to advocate for my clients, in your experience, what were some things you maybe wish people at your treatment team would help you advocate for, or would love to hear from them?
Yeah, I think the period of like medication management, I would say it could really be helpful in your position to help people prep for those psychiatry appointments, because it's so easy for an individual to just get steamrolled over in that environment. So in like your position, really helping someone to develop what it is that they want to say, what they want to convey, and making sure that their voice is heard. Like if there's a possibility to have an advocate of some sort, go to those appointments with them. That can be helpful if they don't feel that they're like, I would have loved to have somebody sit in on those appointments with me who knew what my goal was and could just support me to have my voice heard a little bit more. Because those appointments are just not long enough, not in depth enough. They don't know who you are. So in terms of like medication wise, their voice not being heard, that could be like my one suggestion on that. Yeah. Yeah.
You emphasize a lot the writing, journaling help. In which way personally it help you?
I don't feel like I'm very articulate with my words. So I do much better like writing things down. I'm really not even able to like understand what I'm feeling until I write things down. So just for me to be able to look back at where I was and where I am now and my dreams for where I want to go, that's a really like personal way to be with yourself and like exactly. Yeah. You're discovering yourself in that. And I can't say enough about writing. I love it. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. That's the one thing that when I was in the hospital, when I was in the group home, all of it, that stayed with me. So yeah.
Excuse me. Thank you very much for sharing your story. My brother struggles with voices, and I've been learning a bunch about hearing voices network and trying to introduce him to it. One thing that I've found some of these techniques of asking the voices to make appointments or to talk to them at certain times of day. I've talked to my brother about this, and he's tried it, but sometimes he'll try it and then it won't work, and then he'll kind of give up on it. No. I'm just curious if you've had setbacks like that and what advice you might give to somebody else who's trying to apply those coping skills but has setbacks.
Yeah, I relate to that a lot. I haven't always been successful in those types of measures, but just continuing to try these things again, if you can work with the person to just keep trying that experimentation, you don't know what's going to work until it does work. But for me personally, I'm a big advocate of just like taking a beat, just stepping outside. Like I need a quiet moment. And yeah, like it can be scary to talk to the voices or to bargain with the voices or what have you, if you haven't kind of explored what that looks like. Like therapy could be like a good place to start to work on that, assuming that you have a provider who's willing to do that. But like my therapist that I had for a long time was great. She would talk directly to the voices, which was like revolutionary for me. I never had anybody do that. And like when she would see it in my face and everything, she would say, okay, tell them I need to talk to you, tell them 10 more minutes, tell like things like that, like not being afraid to kind of do that sometimes as like a supporter can be really influential. But it takes a long time to get strategies like that to stick. But I have heard really amazing results though about when you can start to get to the point, because that's ultimately taking back your power over the voices. That's when you can define those times of I need this time now, let's make an appointment for later. Like that's when you're truly starting to take back your power. But that's taken me years and years. So, I mean, I'm still figuring it out, just validating the strength of like your brother, of being with him and like the courage that it takes to keep trying those things. I mean, that's huge for you to do. And I'm sure you're a great support. So it's awesome. Yeah.
Hi, thank you so much for sharing. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
I have a question. You said that, I mean, if you don't want an answer, don't please. That you found value or are in the process of finding value in articulating like some meaning to the voices based on your past. And do you think in this meaning making process, what understanding your dreams, have they had a place? Do you find?
Like sleeping.
Sleeping.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think that's, yeah. Oh my God. That's such a great point. Yeah, I get extreme, like vivid dreams. Sometimes hearing voices can creep over into a weird, like, without going too deep, like a spiritual mediumship category type of something like that. I mean, there's a lot of spirituality in the hearing voices. And I found that like in my dreams, like what could be construed as, more like nonsensical stuff, I find the most meaning in my dreams. I mean, that's where I get the most guidance of where to go next in my life. I'll believe what you want, but I get like premonitions in my dreams sometimes that are really important for me to follow. I'll receive insight kind of into more experiences. There's a lot of my life that like I don't remember, that's either been suppressed or I couldn't remember because of voices, and that will arise in my dreams. So I don't get like a ton of relaxation in my dreams or in my sleep. Like it's not like, time to go to bed, gonna wake up feeling refreshed. Like I wake up kind of exhausted because there's so much content in those dreams. And I definitely think writing down the dreams can be really helpful. And again, that was something that I analyzed with my psychologist and provided a lot of guidance of moving forward in different categories. So I think that's a really awesome question. Yeah.
Any other questions? There was a comment in the chat that said, "You're an amazing warrior, and I'm really proud of you."
Oh,
So.
Thank you, chat person. Oh, fun. Yeah.
One more.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hi, my name is McKaylee. I was kind of curious about the time in your life when you kind of described it as like being shut off or being I don't know if that's the right words that you used, but basically like not really being able to be there, like to be in the moment or to be yourself. And I'm wondering about like what would have been helpful to you in those times. You mentioned sort of that lack of patience over time. Like maybe initially people would be like, "Oh, we get it. You're going through something and, you need space," but then that would stop. So it sounds like that's part of it, but I'm curious about those times when you did, we weren't able to maybe engage with what your therapist wanted or whatever that is.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a lot to that. I think a consistent theme over my life has been feeling like I haven't been able to be myself. And I think that that's fed into a lot of the voices. It can feel difficult when it feels like there's a clear agenda. Like I felt like my service providers wanted me to be something that I couldn't. My psychiatrist wanted me to progress in ways that I couldn't. It's very challenging as a young person to talk to your peers about hearing voices or be in a relationship and, try to explain that you're a voice here. I mean, there were so many ways that I felt like my existence was just kind of like squished down. And even now, I mean, I like struggle. And it's hard when like I can relate to, again, what Jennifer, you were saying earlier of when you're just so used to going on, just pushing on despite of like, you can get up, you can go to work, you can, put yourself together maybe. So then it starts to feel like people don't recognize like the depth of your struggle. Even when I go to like peer support meetings or something, they're like, "Oh, you look great. Like you're glowing." And like, I've literally just been, crying for 2 hours or what have you. Like, again, it's not judging a book by its cover, cliche, but can't say enough about it. You don't know what people are going through. And if I, in these various phases over my life, could have just had a bit more space to like explore or have like the rope to kind of play with a little bit, or just not have these expectations put on me, I feel like I could have like, that cycle could have been stopped a bit sooner. It was just so many years of the same thing and insanity, doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. I mean, it wasn't until I really just kind of put my fist down and was like, this system doesn't have what I need. Like, I need to find it on my own. And I'm working on being my more authentic self, which can be challenging when you have like dissociative qualities and these different parts of self that are so present. And, you know, the parts of self like certainly play into the voices. And these are all pieces of who I am. And it's that, like, what I hope is to fuse all of these pieces together so that I can just kind of like be me, you know, but that's a really challenging process, but the work continues. Yeah. No, yeah.
So I'm just like, as I'm listening and learning, it's like my brain is making new connections, you know, as we're talking. And I'm realizing that, or this is my conceptualization, that really any difference between somebody who hasn't heard voices and someone who has is that it's just a matter of degree. There was a talk in this conference about internal family systems, which I didn't attend, but now I really can see how it's connected. We all, you know, there's more and more of an understanding that that we are all multiples, our personalities are fragmented.
Yeah.
But for someone who hasn't heard voices, there's probably just more coherence.
Sure.
I have voices in my head that are, a voice of a critical parent, a voice of XYZ, but it just manifests a little bit differently. It's a little more integrated.
Yeah.
And that's all it is there's a continuum of integration. And so what I hope for you, just based on what you just said, is that I hope soon there's more integration within your system.
Yeah.
And I think as mental health professionals, it's so much our work, what comment I made earlier about we medicate patients to deal with our own feelings of discomfort. That's total bullshit. And it has to stop. We all need to be doing our work to understand ourselves. If we don't understand ourselves, how can we possibly think that we can help anybody else?
Yeah, that's very insightful. And it's the same thing. Most people in my trainings that I'll do in Montgomery County, it's, if there's been a song that's stuck in your head and you can't get it out of your head, if you've lost a loved one and you think that, you hear them calling to you, like all of these things are like you're experiencing a portion of like voice hearing, like that's no different than it just manifests a little bit differently, but the experience, that phenomenon is the same. So to start to break that stigma a little bit that unfortunately is still present when it comes to hearing voices, just making those human connections can go a long way. So, yeah.
Any other final questions? All right. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you guys so much. Really appreciate it.